Let's take a look at what the platform looks like in practice. And before we do that, I want to explain conceptually the components of the platform. And there are 5 major components here. First, we talk about how to actually get insights from your identity data, from specific queries. We'll show you example queries from the point of view of multiple different users. Then how do you set up controls? How do you monitor controls and set out alerts? And then how would you indicate necessary changes if there are changes that have to happen? And then how would you then include other people in the process through access reviews, if that's what you want to do? And finally, how would you get data into Elimity insights? So I'll try not to smack you down with different features, but make it as realistic as possible. The way that we can do that is to look at different questions that exist in the universe of your organization. Most likely someone is asking these questions today, and we will take you through the steps of how to find answers to these. Not all of these, that would be too much, but we can just highlight a few that matter the most. And with this, we can switch to the demo. So now you're looking at the demo environment of Elimity Insights. And to be clear, Elimity Insights comes in 2 flavors. You can deploy it on premise, or you can use the SaaS version. This is the SaaS version of our product. Here we have 13 different sources of identity data. Of course, in your environment, the number will be different. It could be fewer sources than this. Some of our customers start with just one. For example, if they've gone through the effort of consolidating data in their IGA, why not reuse that effort and start analytics with just that source? But interestingly enough, even those who think that they have everything in IGA, inevitably there comes up a disconnected application or maybe some unstructured data source like Windows file share that they eventually want to include as well for the purposes of oversight, governance, and analytics. And so another thing to note is that these sources here, the HR source, IGA source, Active Directory, they all appear separate, but in reality, they're already linked behind the scenes. And that's why the platform has the power that it has, because all the data is logically linked together already. We typically suggest when you start looking at an environment like this is that you look at the HR source first, because it has a lot of interesting metadata. You can have a look at the specific employee and see the end date, see the manager, see different kinds of information. But the data, as I mentioned before, is already linked. So you have a variety of additional data points at your fingertips. But of course, the system is designed such that you can run very insightful queries very quickly. And I'll show you in a minute how to do that. And before we do, again, a brief reminder that, first of all, this is an analytics platform, right? Not a provisioning system. So this system does not provision. Compared to an IGA, we don't flatten the list of entitlements when we bring the data in. So we preserve the original data model. And the last thing I want to mention is that this is designed with self-service analytics in mind, so that you can invite other users, other stakeholders in your organization to contribute, create this collaborative environment where they can indicate changes as needed, and run analytics also themselves in a very controlled, secure environment. So really a different approach to reporting altogether. So back to the question of how would you get meaning out of this set of data using Elimity Insights platform. There are really 3 main ways of doing that. So first one is what we call tables. It's really Excel on steroids, where you do simple sorting and filtering of data. But because data is linked already, the results are very powerful. The second one is slightly more advanced, called Advanced Query Language, AQL, where you can run more complicated queries. And really, this is where the power of a platform is at your fingertips. You can do and/or statements and compare different sources. So it's really very powerful tool at that level. And then third, IAM specific inquiries like peer review. So to show you the first one, we can go back here for a second to the kind of questions that we want to explore. And let's just say I put on a hat of a security expert, and I want to find out, do I have any retired employees in my organization who still have access to Windows file shares? And this is an interesting question because obviously HR is not directly linked to Windows file shares. But as I've mentioned before, this link is already exists behind the scenes. Elimity Insights takes care of that link behind the scenes. And so the only thing you'd want to do at this case is, first of all, group your employees based on their status. And we can see that we have about 1,200 employees with the status of retired. We can click through into this. And the next thing that we'd want to do is to then link these employees to the Windows file shares. And we specifically want to link to the count of Windows file shares because obviously we want to see zeros, right? If they're retired employees, they should have no Windows file share resources at all. And this looks good at first glance, but if we sort the data, we find that there is in fact one employee who still has this kind of access. And we can look at this employee and we can look at their end date. We can do this brief investigation of their HR status, but then we can also see what sort of entitlements and permissions they have across the organization in different systems. Okay, so that inquiry here took me 30 seconds to do it, but behind the scenes, the link is from HR to AD to Windows file shares, and that's the heavy lift, and that's something that an organization would have to do manually otherwise, and it would be a very significant cost in terms of resources and time just to find this information. So let's change the hat a little bit, and let's pretend now that I'm a system owner or application owner, and I want to know who can access my system, and more specifically, if it's a shared services model, for example, I want to make sure that I'm billing everybody that I should be billing, and at the same time that only people who should have access to my system really do have that access. So how would I go about doing this in this environment? Well, first thing you'd want to do is just look at the list of applications, for example, that you have in your IGA system and pick one. And IGA provides a lot of useful information about the roles and entitlements, but it doesn't really help me from a point of view of, for example, cost center, because cost center information is in the HR system. So this is where that link to the HR system really shines, because I can go to that. And now I see all these employees that are linked to my application, and I can do something as simple as group it on a cost center. And once I've done that, the information is quite revealing because, first of all, I have a number of his employees who are not assigned a cost center. So it's entirely possible that I'm not even billing them for accessing my application. But also I can start investigating other cost centers that are listed here just to make sure that they belong to the right part of the organization. That if I have a finance application, I'm not having someone from marketing access it, as an example. So these are examples. So these two examples I've just given you, again, across different sources, quick investigations, just grouping, sorting, and filtering. But the results are very revealing because, again, the data is linked in the background. Now, let's maybe elevate this discussion to a slightly higher level, and let's look at some strategic objectives. And let's pretend for a second that I work in the security office, and I was asked to investigate orphan accounts. By the way, Elimity publishes an IAM KPI guide. Some of you who've signed up for this webinar have already downloaded it. And if you haven't yet, please visit our website and download it as well, because it's a good overview of different controls that you can introduce in your organization to follow ISO 27001 or SOC 2 regulations to provide the right kind of KPIs for identity and access management. We specifically identified 8 that are very meaningful in that context. And one of them is orphan accounts. And of course, orphan accounts may require different kinds of investigations and queries to really understand. And so let's just say that in this example, so and you may even start with something very simple like last logon from your Active Directory, and then you can sort it, by which one of his users is linked back to active employee, even if they've logged in, 5 years ago last time. So all kinds of questions you can ask into the data set. But let's illustrate the power of AQL, so advanced query language, and build a specific query to find some of his orphan accounts in this data set. And what we can do is we can say, okay, let's find all Active Directory users that are enabled. Okay, so it's enabled is true, but they're linked to HR employees who are not active. Okay, so now we're filtering and sorting two different sources of identity. And like I said, let's look at Active Directory first and just find those users for whom the enabled status equals true. So that would be our first filter. But at the same time, we want to link this to our HR system. And within the HR system, we want to add a condition or a filter. And and what we want to say is that the status of this employee does not contain active. Okay, so this hopefully the result of this search is exactly 0, because that would be a good outcome. Unfortunately, in our data set, it's actually over 2,000 employees who Active Directory users who fulfill this requirement. So we have a lot of work to do to investigate this, because they're all potentially orphan accounts. But again, from here, I can start grouping the data and sorting the data by manager, for example, or some other attribute, which would be meaningful. So here you see how you start to combine this advanced query language with tables, with what I've shown you before. So this is the idea behind this dynamic exploration of data, which is very different from reporting, because the report, after a few weeks, you may get the report of something like this, but if it contains a lot of data, you have to refine it. And that's where these additional steps and additional delays really drain the resources from the organization. Whereas here, you can do this dynamically in a very kind of interactive environment. And so the last part that I want to showcase in terms of understanding the data is the peer review analytics, where we compare two sets of resources to each other, and then we see the links between these two resources. We'll look at another aspect of security, which is access accumulation, also available on this KPI guide that I've shown you earlier. And access accumulation, right, the proverbial mover problem, when someone moves with an organization and they retain all the access from the previous position, previous job they had. So how would we explore something like that? So let's say we're going back to the employee tab, and what we want to do here is find a specific group, find a specific cost center. And I happen to know one, which contains some interesting data. So cost center 001, and we can click through that. Okay, and we see that it contains 25 employees. And what we want to do now is to bring in linked AD groups, right? Because what we want to do is we want to look at all these employees who have the same cost center are also linked to the same Active Directory groups or not, right? And see if we have any outliers, again, from the security perspective. So we're looking at linked entities, just like we did before, and we're looking at AD groups overview, okay? And once we introduce this column here, there's a little looking glass icon, we can open it as a peer review. Okay, and we see that indeed we have 25 employees who are linked to 76 groups, and Elimity Insights provides an outline, a graphical representation of all the different groups that these users belong to, and you can begin to explore and see if anyone has excessive permissions. Now, inevitably, when our customers first time they do this type of analytics, they find someone who really has too much access, and in this case, it seems like this particular employee orally has too much access, and this has to be investigated and perhaps removed. Now, the interesting part about this analysis is, again, we've done it from a security perspective. It makes a lot of sense to have a look at this and remove unneeded access. But there is another way to look at it, which is to go to the other side of it and see which groups are truly in common for this cost center. And if you're designing roles, that would be a good indicator that maybe these particular groups on this side should be included in a specific role. So really two components to this, one from security, so same analysis, but two different outcomes depending on which hat you wear, and security one or IAM expert one. Okay, so with this said, we've looked at the first component, which is how to understand who can do what, how to identify risks, how to identify outliers. And now the important component to highlight is the fact that all these queries that I've shown you, they can also be stored or saved. Okay, so you don't have to redo this work over and over again. You can store the query, and once you do that, then you can automatically monitor your performance against that control to see if there is improvement, if remediation efforts are paying off. And you can internally track the progress. You can report on this to your management. We have one customer who's created over 200 of these controls. Some of them he shares with his management, some of them he does not, as he cleans up the data. And the idea behind this effort actually is that once this data is clean, he can then open access to this tool to others in the organization so that they can begin to also contribute, again, in the self-service analytics line of thinking. So really the idea is to get clean and then stay clean through the effort of all the teams involved. You can see different changes and change details. You can set up thresholds for alerts. You can always get alerted if there are instances of this control that take place over email, for example. So really a lot of options in terms of just how tightly you want to control your environment. Another example is one of our customers, they've set up a KPI for when groups were created outside of standard process. Right, so they had a standard process. They were leveraging their IGA system to create groups, but they found that still there were instances when groups were created directly in Active Directory, and so Elimity can track that. So they've set up this KPI. Again, just an example. There are many others out there as well. So with that being said, another concept that I want to make sure we get a chance to explain is the fact that you can indicate and track necessary changes. And if there is a specific tab for that. So it says a platform where you can look at all the requests that for change that have happened over time, and they're tracked here. And again, if you think about this from a point of view of an organization like the one that we've described in the beginning of the webinar, where they have over 500 different IAM experts and business IT experts who use this platform on a daily basis. They contribute this information. They know who from their organization left or changed jobs or something else has changed. So they're keeping this up to date, and the data stays clean because of this collaboration between different teams. And this is where these changes go. Just to give you kind of a little more information on that, if you click on a user, you can of course see all the different details like I've described before from an HR perspective, and everything you see here can be requested to be changed. Okay, so all these different items from a user profile, you can request the change to take place. And again, Dirty data is very expensive, right? We talked about expense, so this is a way to keep it clean and drive down the costs of keeping the data clean. Okay, and so and by the way, also if you look at this change request platform, what this does for you, right? You've just investigated identity data. You found some outliers. You've seen where the gaps are. Now you've requested the change. It comes to this platform here, and here you can track. Once it's fixed, there is a mark. It says completed, and so you have this proof, this audit trail proof of having found an issue and having fixed it. So it's an end-to-end workflow that allows you to prove that you're following the governance process as needed. So it's a closed loop governance, in other words. So another component of the platform, of course, once you want to involve other people, you need to do access reviews. I'm not going to go into details because in the interest of time, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to explain it in more detail. But we do have access review capability because we've seen that our customers were actually emailing Excel spreadsheets based on the data they found in Elimity. So we thought there is a better way of doing this. So we do have access reviews capability, and you can involve other people to provide feedback on whether or not the data is correct or is not correct. And in fact, it looks a little bit like the tab that I shown you before with peer review, but specific to a manager to provide feedback on their team access and whether it's correct or not correct. And so now the last thing that I wanted to show you is exactly how would you get data into a Elimity platform to begin with. Okay, and this will be probably a very different process from what you're used to if you come from an IGA world where this is a big challenge. So in Elimity, we have a tab called Sources, and a lot of these sources come pre-configured, right? So Active Directory, Azure AD. Again, this is a read-only connector, so a very lightweight connector, and these can be set up in a matter of 30 minutes or less. Of course, we work with very large organizations that have a lot of custom legacy sources. For those, the work has to be done for the teams, our team and your team, to understand the data model. But once that's in place, again, this is a very quick process of 1 day or 2 days, something like that, to create a custom connector. There is also an option of starting the work with Elimity with just an export, like a CSV upload, while this connector is being put in place, just so that you can get the initial insights as quickly as possible. And the overall objective is that top 5 of customers' systems are in Elimity within just a few days, and that really is allows us to deploy and stand up the platform very quickly. And then the last thing that I wanted to share with you is just a conclusion and an overview, right? We've looked at exactly how you would go through this identity data platform to understand the meaning of data and run different queries, either using a very simple but very powerful tables, Excel on steroids. You can also look at advanced query language and really dive deeper into the data with different statements and functions. And you can also look at IAM specific analytics. Then you can set up these queries that you've done. You can save them, you can store the query, and then you can get alerts, and you can monitor the results of your remediation efforts over time. You can indicate and track necessary changes all at the same time. So that's and then last but not least, you can also look at the access reviews and involve other people in managing that. And so this concludes the demo, also concludes the presentation. And in terms of presentation, we've looked at the need for identity insights. and why there are so many data questions now, and there will be even more data questions in the future. We looked at the difference between the two approaches. One is fragmented reporting, a status quo for a lot of companies. We compared that to the integrated analytics approach, a dynamic approach where you can continuously query the data. And then we've done a demo as well. I want to leave you with this last slide. If you're interested in learning more, I can strongly recommend that you browse the following resources on our website and download some of these guides. And I thank you for your attention. And if there are questions, we have